Over the last 5, 10 years, there's been just a huge amount of interest in pop culture, public media, and you've been on the Huberman podcast and the Lex Friedman podcast. What is all this interest about, and what's it like talking on some of the world's largest podcasts about psychedelics, and why is it happening now, do you think?
These days, I'd probably spend more of my energy saying psychedelics aren't for everybody. There are risks. Here's what they are. While at the same time saying, yeah, there's a whole lot of value here. Someone could tell their therapist, I'm doing it this time. I'm getting away from, I'm going to stop using heroin, whatever. The opportunity to get high is like not in your office. But like later on that night, girl using buddy says, man, I just scored some. You want to get high right now? I see depression as addiction. Like, I know thinking about things in a certain way is horrible. I know that it's not good. I know it's putting me in this pit that's just getting deeper. I'm just like this. I'm just a victim. And there's this sort of like benefit of stepping outside of that, saying that's not the whole story. To me, it's just like a drug addiction. It's not just you of today, and it's not just you as a person. It's you as a family member, as a friend, as a citizen of this community, of this nation. It's all of these roles that you have, all of the yous across time. There's an integration there.
It's a new autopilot, and it becomes routine, it becomes habit. That initial spark of like, oh, things can be different, I can change, becomes the new reality. Welcome to the Healing Mindset, brought to you by MAPA Minds, next generation mental health clinics delivering Spravato and ketamine therapy to people living with depression. I am your host, David Drapkin, and today we're joined by the one and only Professor Matthew Johnson. And Matt is literally one of the world's leading psychedelic researchers. For the past 20 years, Matt's explored how psychedelics impact addiction, depression, personality change, and mystical experience. We're going to talk about all of those things. His work has even been featured on 60 Minutes with Anderson Cooper, great interview there, and he's also been interviewed by Andrew Huberman and Lex Friedman on their podcasts. In the conversation I have with Matt, we dive into what really makes transformation happen, especially how short-lived psychedelic experiences can lead to lasting changes in our behavior, psychology, identity, and self-agency, something that Matt is going to be doing more research on moving forwards. By the end of this podcast, you'll have a clearer sense of how psychedelics might help us to rethink addiction, depression, and especially the way that we define ourselves. Enjoy this episode of The Healing Mindset. So, you've been doing this work for literally decades, and over the last 5, 10 years, there's been just a huge amount of interest in pop culture, public media, and you've been on the Huberman podcast and the Lex Friedman podcast and my podcast. So, what is all this interest about, and what's it like talking on these, some of the world's largest podcasts about psychedelics, and why is it happening now, do you think?
I think there's just this interest in that, something that has been very taboo and still is to a degree, but there's something culturally that happens when something goes from the shadows into the mainstream, and there's just like a whole lot of dynamics there. There's an interest. I think it's that dynamic of like, just, hey, there's this thing that's naughty that's now being taken seriously, and kind of science is the for better or worse is kind of held as it has this kind of special place. Science and medicine have this kind of special place of being of what should be taken seriously, what's real in some sense. If you conduct these trials that show to the FDA and to their satisfaction, and the EMA in Europe, etc., you at least kind of carve out that exception, like, no, this is allowed, at least in this medical context, so it has very real. One other potential thing is like pushing for religious use, because like in the United States, the First Amendment, and there is, protected religious use for the Native American Church and the UDV and Santo Daime, but kind of in a much broader sense.
When you first started in this psychedelic world, or circus, as I sometimes call it, what was your role then? Like, what were your questions and hypotheses? What was, the draw into this space of research and industry? And how's that evolved over time? So what is it now, kind of 20 plus years later? What stayed the same consistently, and what's changed? Because we are always evolving.
Yeah, so when I got into it, I just had completed my PhD. So I was in a much junior place, like not only in my career but in life. Um, and the attraction to me was really the idea that these were powerful tools, particularly for understanding and changing behavior that just weren't being taken seriously. So my primary scientific lens is that of a behavioral psychologist, and I was very interested in my undergraduate training um, in the work of B.F. Skinner and other behavioral psychologists, this idea that psychology can be a natural science, like not one that just sort of, full of, untestable theories and sort of, I don't know. I mean, sort of the prototype of this would be like, Freudian analysis, which I'm very, I don't want to dog on psychodynamics. I'm actually, very open, just mindful that, a lot of the propositions are ones that aren't testable. And so that's really important to just keep in mind. And so the potential to go off the rails is there. But I was really in love with this idea that behavior can be seen as a natural science, and that there are laws and a predictive ability, an ability to kind of leverage the environment towards helping people. And I was always kind of interested in what can we do to help people in ways that they want to be helped, but they struggle with. So addiction is such an easy example of that. Like someone will say that they've tried to change this thing that they do. And so they waffle between these different motivations, sometimes for decades. And I did some research in the library, and this is before the internet was even mainstream. This was in the mid like 90s, and just at the library reading these books about this old psychedelic research, and like, oh, they were using LSD to help people with alcoholism, huh? And then kind of figuring out that, well, that wasn't really because it stopped, not because it didn't work, but because, of the 60s, because of the counterculture movement and all of this, the politics and everything that kind of the 60s represented for society, and that there was a backlash to that. And some real casualties as well, but in terms of the medical use, there was really no reason that it should have stopped. But it was so cloudy. I mean, because some of the research with psychedelics was like very diabolical. There was the stuff with the CIA, and there was stuff that, even outside of that shouldn't have been done. But this was also the 60s and the 50s as well, but all kinds of horrible stuff. But there was no reason that like ethical and responsible work shouldn't have continued. And so I don't know, it was just kind of apparent that, wow, like this, it's crazy that these are clearly very, very powerful tools, powerful manipulations. And it's just not crazy at all to think they could help people. And I put it this way, that I had never heard stories of a single use of any other substance causing long-term good in someone's life. And so even the good stories, and this was, when I was in college, like it was, those were the days when Prop 215 in California for the first medical marijuana law was first passed by ballot initiative. And so it's like, plenty of stories, even in those, cannabis having benefit. No one ever said they smoked pot once 30 years ago and it changed the course of their life. If it had some beneficial effect, it's because they kept using it in a palliative sense. And if there's anything else like that, where the single use of a substance like changed someone's life, it was always for the bad. You got really drunk and you drove and you killed someone. You did too much cocaine and you had a stroke. Like there's just like not even a single example, even with something like cannabis, where people will say things like, I took this when I was in college or a teenager, and I realized the course I was on was wrong, and it helped me repair my relationship with whoever, with a family member, because I saw myself in a
Mm.
different way. And they're telling you the story like years later. Like, what is that? Like, that's so fascinating to us, a person interested in human psychology. Um,
Yeah, and I know looking back at some of your work, Matt, the idea of these being really powerful tools, and literally you could have these incredible experiences with one dose, or they could also be quite harrowing, and there's no guarantees which way it goes. So something that you've consistently talked about is safety. And I want to talk about addiction and go quite deep into that in this chat. Maybe before we do talk about addiction, let's just talk about safety, perhaps from the perspective of decision making. So, how do humans make their decisions around what is good for them, what is right for them, and whether or not they always do what is right for them? They make the right choices or not? And do they consciously make the wrong choice? And this can lead us into addiction, but just generally speaking, humans and their, in a sense, agency and choice.
yeah, something that I focused on outside of psychedelics, was work in behavioral economics, applying economic principles to how people make decisions, and sort of just the really interesting stuff there is just there are all of these phenomena where humans and actually other organisms, to the degree you can test them. So something I've spent decades studying is this. It's called delayed discounting. It's very related to Walter Mischel's Marshmallow test, or so-called delayed gratification, but sort of looking at how people systematically devalue a consequence, good or bad, as a function of its delay. So you can assess this by money decisions. I could keep adjusting that to find that indifference point, and then I could say, okay, well, let's ask those decisions over a year. What about 5 years? And you can map out this discounting curve. But what this predicts, and you could lay this out, and I've done lots of experiments, and others have done plenty of experiments with this, is that this sets up this situation for preference reversals, and vision decays hyperbolically as well. So we can set up an analogy. Let's say you're trying to stop drinking, or at least drink less, and you say, I know this is not good for my life. I'm, whatever, putting myself at risk for these, for cancer and heart disease, and it's more likely to go off at the mouth and get in an argument with my spouse, whatever it is, and so it's I know I would be better off long term not drinking, or at least drinking less. But what feels better right now? Having a drink or two. And that's why it's always easier to say, I'm going to quit tomorrow or next week. And, but as those two things come closer, so someone could tell their therapist, doc, I'm doing it this time. I'm getting away from, I'm going to stop using heroin, whatever. And they're being genuine. They're not lying to you. And, the opportunity to get high is not in your office, but later on that night, their old using buddy says, man, I just scored some. You want to get high right now? And then the apps are, again, genuinely as apps of freaking-lutely. And that's like that telephone pole, that smaller one is right in their vision. And so it's the same thing that it's not just the product of a hardcore addiction. You set your alarm the night before to get up extra early. So you normally get up at 7, say, I got to get up at 6 for this important thing. And you set your alarm, and then it goes off in the morning, so those consequences are far ahead of time. When you go to bed, let's say 10 p.m., you say, I'm setting that alarm. I'm doing the right thing. I can see what's the more important. But what's the first thing you do when the alarm you hit the snooze alarm bar, and maybe you do that 4 or 5 times before you finally get up. So it's this preference reversal. And to me, that is the heart of addiction. It's you really have different motivations, and the nature, and this relates to the nature of time, the nature of the long-term value, the value of not having a drink does not come from one night. I mean, let's say it's cigarette smoking. Skipping smoking for one day will basically do nothing to improve your health. Like, if you don't trust the future you of the day after and a week and a month and a year after to follow suit, you might as well smoke. Because there's no, and now drinking's a little different because you could literally get in a fatal car accident during that one day. But so smoking in some sense is a clean example in the sense that, like, nothing bad is going to come from just smoking one day, realistically. So all of the value is in this integrative whole. It integrates across time, where the sum of the total is far more. The value of the total is far more than the sum of the individual parts. And so it's an inherent disadvantage, because all you have to do is defect a limited number of times to destroy the progress on that side of things. And so that's why to me, but I see this playing out. It's not just addiction again. It's, well, I've got to be more patient with my kid. I've got to work, put more focus in this aspect of my work. I need to do better at I need to, whatever it is, I need to help more around the house, clean up and not put it all on my wife. All of these, we need to do better for the environment. I mean, all of these things are kind of the same situation that it's at play with the tragedy of the commons. Like, individually, like, the world's not going to end because of you individually throwing trash everywhere. But if everyone acts like that, it's going to make life worse for everyone. So it's like, that's called the tragedy of the commons. That's the exact same situation as you not trusting yourself of tomorrow and the day after. So it's this kind of nested, collective goods game that's going on within the individual. Again, I see a depression as addiction, or how you deal with cancer. Like, I know thinking about things in this certain way is horrible. I know that it's not good. I know it's putting me in this pit that's just getting deeper, but there's this sort of, it's like addiction. There's this attraction to woe is me. Life is just, I'm just like this. I'm just a victim. I'm just, and there's this sort of this benefit of stepping outside of that, saying, hold on, that's not the whole story. To me, it's just like, a drug addiction.
I love how you're talking about us being, in a sense, complex and made of many parts, and almost like being a, internal family systems idea that, maybe we're a company and each employee needs to say, hey, this is what I need, this is what I want. Whereas if there's just one employee who's always saying, well, I just want to drink, and right now that's all I care about. That's where, having worked in addiction many years as a therapist, that's this idea of us having a part of us that is always sabotaging long-term recovery. So this idea of self-sabotage is this part of us, I guess, we're saying here, that always thinks about the right now. And often it can be making that decision, I'm just going to drink or shoot heroin, because it's doing it for a reason that is valid, because I don't want to feel so shit. I don't want to feel these cravings. I can't cope with my sense of loss or emptiness, whatever it might be, all these memories that are coming back. But then there's also the next step I want to explore with you, Matt. Future self. We're discounting that future me. And I think a lot of people with substance use challenges, there's this, what are you talking about, future self, David? There's, this is who I am, and it's a sickness, and this is who I'm always going to be an addict. And, I can never get over what I've done in the past. And it doesn't matter how many times I go through detox and rehab and IOP. This is who I am. I can't ever run away from myself. But psychedelics seem to have this ability to take a step back, to see ourselves from a fresh perspective. Also our past, definitely not pushing the past under the carpet, looking at our past in a new kind of way, but also just sensing, I think there is a future David here that could be alive, or that isn't dead. And I want to bring that future self into play, bring them on the field, welcome them back in. Mm-hmm. So maybe just using this kind of material, what did you find when you were using psilocybin with your patients in the trial that had, smoking, and you were trying to work with them around cessation? what were, in a sense, the mechanisms of change from a psychological level, therapeutic level, that really helped people to see what the cigarettes were representing, what they were doing, and maybe a past self and a future self? What were some interesting things that you found? And was it NIH funded study, this?
It's now NIH funded. Funded.
National Institute of
It
Health, yeah.
was
Great.
Yes, yes. And but it was funded by philanthropy for decades. So we're now in the third study. We've completed the second study and are trying to get it. We've batted it around to several journals. It'll get published soon. We're shooting at the higher tier journals, but that's a study. We did a pilot study, open label, one group, very high quit rates. Second one is comparison to nicotine patch, a randomized study. And the third one is a double-blind study at 3 different sites. But the thing that really strikes me is that people become more integrated. And I think that and psychedelics are cool with this, and these experiences that people tend to have are cool because, you can go down this road of like, I just went on this tirade about like this like behavioral economic, valuation and this kind of mathematical way, this kind of like, game theory way of looking at it. That's the same when someone talks about a shift in their life priorities and about their higher self. I mean, the language is like, these are all menus. The menu is never the meal. There's many ways you could have a menu with the pictures of the thing. You can, write it out in Spanish or in French or in English. It's like, these are all, the meal is the same. So they're describing something that's ultimately beyond words. How do you fully describe what the taste of this delicious food is? Like, it's literally the hard problem of consciousness. You can't capture the felt experience of eating this beautiful meal. So these are all menus. People will say, that it's a change in their life priorities, that something about, it could be framed as they had a sense of the spiritual, that they're an experience of God or an experience of their ancestors, or it can vary so widely. This hierarchy of needs, like all of this language, to me it just points toward it's all about integration, and it can be as kind of woo-woo sounding, or it can be kind of nerdy, and about like evolutionary theory, but it's all about like they're integrating more. It's about the whole, themselves as a whole organism, themselves across time, themselves as a member of a community, that it's not just them as a unit. It's not just you of today, and it's not just you as a person. It's you depending on the person, as a family member, as a friend, as a citizen of this, community, of this nation. It's all of these roles that you have, and then all of the yous across time. There's an integration there. And I think a lot of these traps, I mean, maybe all of them that we fall into, whether it's depression or addiction to this or that, or anxiety, like in some sense is this suboptimal way of orienting towards the whole across these different dimensions. And the bigger that we can be in terms of taking the whole into account, typically the better off we're gonna be.
Yeah, you
And
explained it
it's not, there's
beautifully,
an
Matt.
interesting kind
I
of
know this is really
philosophical, you
hard
might
to
say, well,
talk
they're
about,
not
like you're
living in the
talking about
now.
really far out stuff here, but it's really powerful, especially the piece that we're integrating all of ourselves that have ever existed since we were born, and we're integrating all of the roles that we have in life right now. And just the idea of that, oh, wow, I have a role, like I have a purpose. I'm part of family and culture and community. Oh, because before I was just this one isolated being, and so it didn't really matter what I did. I didn't care about myself, and no one cared about me. So who cares? But wow, It's really powerful what you're saying here, man. I just want to kind of recognize that. It really is fundamentally a shift.
Yeah, in these sessions, they get a glimpse of that, like this integration that's so like you can't encapsulate how big that is, like what it really means to be a
Mm.
person. And I think people can get a glimpse of that just even temporarily, and that's helpful.
Are these
And
mystical
they tend to,
experiences,
maybe
Matt?
it depends on personality, they tend to orient towards different
Mm.
aspects of that.
Sorry there, Matt. I was just asking, are these the mystical experiences that we often hear about in psychedelic literature that you're talking about? So the
Yeah,
patients are
I think so,
having
because you
mystical
think
experiences
about
that
it.
potentially are quite life-changing.
Yeah, so aspects of the mystical, a sense of unity. So there you go, like feeling one with the universe, one with your fellow human beings, one with, if you will, God, if that's your language. Timelessness and spacelessness. There you go. It's like you're not just, it's like, are you a discrete unit, or are you also part of this larger thing? Is it just this right now, or is it you as part of this unfolding story? Is it the world as part of this unfolding story? I mean, it's really all about, kind of like, the ineffability, this idea, like I was saying, it's like, it's impossible to capture how big the whole thing really is, this quality of being a person. So that's the ineffability, the eh, so like all of these aspects of the mystical experience kind of point to this, like this this theme of integration, like putting, like, it's a holistic perspective, it's a gestalt perspective.
To go next is around agency and choice, and we spoke about that before. And you mentioned one patient in a trial in particular, um, who realized, around choice. And I think the idea of discounting the future is a really important part of this as well. And I think you even mentioned at some point a buffet. And so I love buffets where you can go and eat as much as you want, because for me that is a challenge. Or I like, which David do I value? The one that's like, oh, I can get my money's worth here. It's only £6.99, and I can eat 3 days worth of food. Oh, they didn't see me coming, or like, oh, I want a bit of that, and they're going to go back for seconds and thirds. But actually, why? Like, there's a part of me that that really wants and craves and desires and sees like an anomaly from a price perspective, and it's like, great, gluttonous. But there's also this part of me that says, whoa, food is, to give me nutrients, to give me energy. I'm, trying to get more healthy nowadays. So how much do I actually need? Not want, but need. So I have to make a choice there. And it's a really sometimes binary choice. Do I go this way? Do I go
Yeah.
that way? Because it's an infinite buffet, life. We can do anything at any
Mm-hmm.
point in time when we realize it. So how do I orient myself to make the right decision for my highest good? So if you remember the patient you were talking to me about beforehand, yeah, I'd love to hear about it, and then we could just talk about agency.
Yeah. Our discussion before we, started recording, like, this was one of the early smoking cessation participants in the pilot, and I'll just always remember he was a super smart, effective guy. I mean, this guy started NGOs in the third world to help people, and like he's just like one of the much more capable person than me, impressive person, very smart. And he just, but had been struggling to quit smoking since he was a teenager. And towards the end of the session, he was saying, essentially, he was blown away by the idea that he could quit smoking. He would say, I could just decide to quit smoking. I can choose to quit smoking. It's like flicking an insect off of me. I could just do that. And so it sounds stupid. Like, of course you could just do that. But this is part of the ineffable. I think he was wrestling with this like very, very kind of deep theme that he could be an agent in life. I mean, you could call it free will. The whole idea that he's an active participant in reality, which I think that there's an aspect of this with all of these disorders. And in one sense, like, this is like something that it's at play in politics. To what degree are people victims of circumstance versus they need to lift themselves up by the bootstraps. But of course, both are true. The ultimate example might be Viktor Frankl with Man's Search for Meaning. Like, even in the concentration camps of Nazi Germany, like, the only choice he had was how he chose to view reality. Like, whether he's going to give in to basically the dark side of the force, like whether he's going to like end up in, and he would be like thankful, at least I'm not the concentration camp guard, which is like a level of like holding agency that like is just superhuman, that maybe is beyond most of our capability. But the whole idea to, wow, there's some level of gratitude, like, wow, so lucky to be me rather than the one imposing this evil. So like there's always that wiggle room, you know, and like that's like that agency that we can work with. And I think psychedelics can open that up. Like, they're one tool to help kind of shake that up and have people like look at that.
Yeah, and it reinforces what you've said so far, agency around the power it gives ourselves, the responsibility in a sense to look after ourselves, and the belief in the future
Yeah.
self, and that I am important. We are all important. Like this, there is something sacred about life, about choices. Like each decision that we make has meaning. So why is it with psychedelics, Matt, that in particular they have this ability to affect people's agency, would you say? And I know you're going to do more research on this, hopefully, but with your hypothesis so far, what's it suggesting?
It does appear that the default mode network has something to do with kind of this narrative of this kind of sense of self. And, you know, psychedelics sort of scrambled the activity in that network, as well as like basically every network in the nervous system. I mean, there's just like this broad change in network activity. Like the normal channels of communication are just drastically changed. There's more communication between areas that don't normally communicate, and sometimes there's less communication amongst areas that communicate more. So in some sense there's like just this scrambling for problems of habit and problems of routine. I think all of these things are problems of stuckness, like canalization, as Robin Carhart Harris puts it well. You know, these are all problems of like rigidity. Like you're thinking about yourself this certain ways. In depression, you're focused on the bad that can happen. This anxiety, you know, the everything is viewed through the lens in a very fixed way with trauma and leading to PTSD, or this, you know, like, you know, value in life is about using this substance and you're stuck on that. All of these kind of ways of being stuck. And so there's value in scrambling it up. And that's why I think it's not a mistake that people say, you know, call a psychedelic experience a trip. Because I think you get the same things with just changing up life, like on a vacation. Like, yeah, like you're shuffling the deck of cards, you know? And that's, I think, inherently valuable whenever you're dealing with being overly stuck. You know, something to kind of remind you that, like, whatever this situation you're dealing with, there's so much more going on with that. And sometimes then those issues can be seen as like that was a part of like smoking cessation, and also surveys I've done with people overcoming other addictions with psychedelics, is like there's this reframing, like, oh, like quitting smoking used to be like this big thing. If I was quitting smoking, it would be like this huge thing, like the biggest thing going on in my life. And now it's like, you know, because of all these like metaphysical like thoughts, and just, you know, their mind is reeling with these kind of bigger thoughts, like it's just like the small thing, like, oh, I can do that. You know, it's a reframing. So I think just throwing, I mean, again, to borrow some language from Robin, like literally like entropy in the system. And I think like complex systems need that right mix and the right dynamics of like having the right amount of entropy versus the right amount of like rigidity. I mean, we can't be all chaos. We don't want psychedelic like experience on a constant basis. And again, you might find a political analogy there. It's like if you go completely on say a conservative side and change nothing ever, and the past was always right, and you never did change. Well, then we'd still have slavery. Then we'd still like have a feudal system. Okay, you can't go completely on the other side of have nothing but complete chaos. We don't want to scrap, like in the U.S., we don't want to scrap our Constitution at a moment's notice. And just like, it's right to have a relatively high threshold for changing basic systems. And so the hard questions for the self, for society, are all about what's that balance of when we invite change and when we hold on to like what's worked. Like, so structure versus change is just like this fundamental theme of like how we function as humans. And it's all about balance, and people will disagree both in terms of how you live your life, how, and in terms of politics, like how much should you, like if you've had problems drinking, should you try for moderation and say, well, I'd be better off if I could enjoy a drink every, once in a while. And some people can do that. Some people, that's not a good formula. There's no easy answers, but it's kind of comes down to this question of what's that right amount of balance in the system.
I really like that point. Thank you, Matt. Yeah, the beauty of kind of imbalance and disintegration, kind of shaking the snow globe. And there's a piece that we haven't discussed yet I want to bring in, that I don't know that well, but I've heard it mentioned in psychedelic research. And it's particularly within addiction treatment, I've heard it. And it's the idea of priors. And is that,
Yeah.
to talk to us about what that is that just talking about like our prior experiences, our prior assumptions, our prior beliefs, our prior habits? Because the power of priors, from what I've seen, is in a sense stopping the path from changing, because we think it's going to just continue, very much like what you're talking about here. So what is this idea of priors, and how does it apply to change, and also to how psychedelics help people?
Yeah, and again, we can thank Robin for introducing this way of looking at it. So that's part of his rebus model, proposing that it's relaxing priors, relaxing beliefs. That's kind of the primary thing that psychedelics are doing. And so you can certainly think of I mean, the idea is that this plays out both biologically in terms of brain network activity, as well as psychologically, for things like depression, like, the self-defeating narratives. I'm inherently a loser. I'm never gonna, people just inherently don't like me. These thoughts that we can all have and do have, but are like overly expressed and become the main thing with depression. Or, I'm just a no good alcoholic. I'm never gonna or I'm just a smoker. I'm wired that way now. I've been doing it since I was 14, whatever, just go with it. And, you just tell yourselves these stories, those are the priors. I mean, the prior for if you've been smoking for 30 years is to keep smoking. And in depression, the prior is to keep thinking yourself, in a negative light. So the idea is that you're introducing more entropy in the system, bringing it closer to a critical state where there can be more ability to change. Now, I think there's the story is more complex with that. I published a kind of a theoretical paper with Adam Safran, who worked together with me, but it was really his baby. But kind of taking the rebus idea and saying it's more about altering your beliefs, because sometimes there's cases it seems that there's a strengthening. So to me, if there was kind of complete, like if the psychedelic experience was about unilaterally decreasing the strength of priors, it would kind of look more like sort of an anesthetic, like just kind of losing consciousness and maybe high dose alcohol, or but it's sometimes therapeutically the things that rise to the surface, metaphorically, it's the strengthening of priors, so realizing, oh, like this is really important to me, my role as whatever, and it's this like incredible strengthening. So that's why we propose this Cebus idea. like, or which can be the strengthening.
I'm realizing hearing you talk, Matt, that priors are not necessarily bad, and we are not wiping our brain clean of all priors.
Right. So it's more of like having a meta level modulation of it. Like, yes, some priors you don't want to stick to. Like, it would be a bad thing if every married person that had a psychedelic experience came out saying, "Look at the possibilities. I could have a new like spouse. I could, date 1,000 people and look at the upsides of that." Like, no, just like, again, a political analogy, like let's we could do better. Let's rewrite our constitution. Let's change all of hundreds of years of tradition of common law, like, and start completely fresh. And so, no, what, it's always the balance, like what has worked, what brings that integrative value. And in many, hopefully most cases, like, yeah, like your marriage is not something to be thrown out because of, a few days of a bad argument, because the value is inherently in the long term. Just like, perhaps sobriety for a person who's dealt with addiction in their past. It's like, and sometimes in sessions, psychedelic sessions, it is those priors. It's like, what's really important is being a good father and being, and here's this thing. I mean, I think of a woman that says, "I used to write poetry in college. Why don't I do that anymore? That was so meaningful to me. I'm going to start writing poetry again." That was a prior that just like kind of shot up, into the surface through a volcano. Like it had gotten buried underneath the strata, and now it like, okay. And so it is more of this kind of like flexibility in my mind. It's not just about reducing priors. It's about having a flexibility in what those priors, what can remain priors. Sometimes they need to change, or reduce the priors that need to be reduced, but some other priors will be strengthened.
That is great, Matt. I really love the quest for balance. And there's this idea in psychedelics of kind of synaptic pruning. We're kind of pruning our synapses in our brain, but we're also pruning our priors as well. Which ones we need to kind of cut back,
Mm-hmm.
which ones we want to bring to the fore, like, oh, I'm a poet. Oh my God, I need to write more poetry. Beautiful. We've got a few minutes left. You are a really deep chap. So you've definitely not just a pure kind of scientist, whatever that means. There's something that you're interested in around consciousness, spirituality, metaphysics. So I just want to dive into that. We once had a chat, you and I, about consciousness at the Toronto conference that our friend Dr. Dominique Marasano organized a few years ago. And it doesn't have an answer, but I feel like we still have a duty to honor it, the kind of numinous. So what right now is kind of rising up for you when we think about change, truth, hope, and balance within us as individuals and collectively, that has this important kind of metaphysical message or kind of consciousness stream that we are hopefully becoming more aware of, and we are becoming more aware of it on a collective level as well as the individual level. How are you framing this really important piece at the moment?
I guess anything that pushes us towards more awareness, is good, and that we should be mindful that there are limits of that. And this is much like the nervous system works. I mean, if everything was operated by the frontal lobes and you were conscious of everything, like you couldn't function, you couldn't cross the street. Much of our survival is related to like what you put on autopilot and what you don't. Like you don't think about how you wash your hands, or you like literally like I move my hand to my face. Like you don't think about, you just do it. But there's like countless calculations implicitly that are happening there. How do you walk? I mean, you deal with this with people with neurological, they're learning to walk again. It's like you just walked and now you just spent 2 years learning to walk again. And like wherever, like it's just, we can't hold, like if you were you couldn't cross the street if you were aware of the infinite around you. And this is why, for example, it's like not a good idea to be like tripping and walking downtown because, you might be like staring into your hand like this, like an absolute miracle. You could like, contemplate the nature of the universe within your own hand, but you're in the middle of the street and a car is coming about to hit you. And that's part of the miracle of existence too. But no, you want to get to the other side of the street. So our whole, there's value in our normal functioning where a lot is necessarily put on autopilot. And we should be thankful that, like, yes, I can walk without having to think through every step of that. But the more that we can be mindful of that and be conscious of what we put our attention into versus what we, again, at that meta level, it's not that nothing should be on autopilot. It's be aware of what goes on autopilot, including the way you treat others. And are operating in the world. I guess hopefully that makes sense.
I really like that you're giving us
Just
permission
sort
to
of
be
like,
on autopilot sometimes, but it's not all the time. And it's really important in life to have moments where we consciously say, I'm turning off autopilot. And we need to obviously be in a safe space to do that. And it might just be looking up at the sky or looking at our hand on psychedelics or not psychedelics. But we need those moments, because if we are always on autopilot, then I think the net effect of that is demoralization, and life loses its meaning, and my own life lacks purpose. And but going off autopilot, I really like that idea. Thanks, Matt.
and be aware that you can have good autopilot and bad autopilot. So part of, like, say you used to, be a heavy drinker, and now it's like you just don't drink. Like, on any given day, it's not as hard to not drink as that first day of not drinking. That first day of not drinking was like, it took, if we could measure, it was like your frontal lobe was like actively inhibiting. No, have the drink. No, don't. Remember, don't do that. Don't do that. Now it's like another day. Like, now it's like maybe swatting down every once in a while. Something bubbles up and you're like, you smack it back, but you don't have to spend all of your time smacking it back down. And so that's the same way if you get in the habit of, I don't know, treating others with courtesy and respect, and you get in the habit of spending time with your kid without looking at your phone. If you get in the habit of being out in nature, like that too becomes autopilot. And even when you're on autopilot, there are times that will be more or less conscious within that time, but at least kind of putting yourself in that position of like being with your kid, or, exposing yourself to nature, or not using this or that substance, or, eating healthy. Like, that's a good thing. Like, you want to orchestrate your environment to where you're not dealing with all of your temptations. Like, you want to, like, keep in mind that we are all a limited resource, and you don't want to put yourself in the worst situation. It's why in addiction, people, places, and things, like, don't, like, be aware that, like, humans are limited, and that, like, orchestrate yourself and your environment so that you can, push yourself in the directions that you want to go, being aware of the fact that you're going to be limited. If you put yourself in the wrong circumstance, you're going to do stuff that you would have regretted. So try your best to kind of establish healthy patterns.
Just to close it, what you're saying there's great, because we're first starting off with this idea that, maybe I can change in my life. Maybe the future can be different. And then we're also talking, after enough time goes by, our sense of autopilot kicks in, that it's a new autopilot, and it becomes routine, it becomes habit. So that initial spark of like, things can be different, I can change, becomes the new reality. Before we wrap up, tell people, like, if they want to read more of your research or connect with you, where they should go, and also tell people what are some of the new, projects that you're hoping to be working on moving forwards.
Yeah, so I guess social media, trying to stay more active on LinkedIn these days, and X. I think LinkedIn. I think you can find me with Matthew Johnson, Psychedelics probably, and I'm drug_researcher on X. And yeah, and if you could, I've done plenty of podcasts and whatnot, most of which you could find on YouTube. Look me up on PubMed if you want to read some of my papers, But yeah, in terms of I'm actually looking at the next step of my career now. So I'm considering options, and it's kind of a point of, there's a little bit of entropy right now myself in terms of, I'd like to focus more on, certainly staying with psychedelics, focus more on understanding agency, like most things in research. It's kind of like we're dependent on the funding. But I'm trying to generate some interest in conducting more of a science on the sense of understanding how psychedelics afford a sense of agency, which I think can underlie a lot of the therapeutics we're looking at. And certainly continuing the smoking cessation and other addiction work.
Amazing. Thank you, Professor Matt Johnson. So lovely having you on the show. And looking forward to many more wonderful conversations. God bless.
Yeah, thanks, David. I really appreciate it.
Take care, everybody. MAPA Minds, a network of next-generation mental health clinics offering Spravato and ketamine treatment for depression. Go to mapaminds.com for more information.